Peter Stursberg was born in China in 1913. His mother was half Japanese and half Irish, and his father was a member of the colonial administration, the British colonial administration in China. So he grew up in a curious kind of imperial household of mixed race, and ultimately ended up in Canada when he was very early 20s and started his career as a journalist. He had become one of the very first people working for the CBC News. This is around 1938, and the CBC had just set up a news department. And of course, like he would have been at the time in 1938, 25 years old, say. So like everybody, every journalist of the period, when the war broke out, the number one thing they wanted to do was they wanted to go to cover the war. So finally in 1942, they agreed to send him, and in early 1943, he arrived in London. His job entailed basically following the Canadian troops. He covered them first of all in the invasion of Sicily, and then as they progressed up Italy and across the so-called Hitler line. So he followed the Canadian troops all through Italy. Then he followed the Canadian troops for the liberation of Holland, and then he ended up in Berlin just shortly after VE Day. And through the course of it all, of course, what he was doing was he was reporting on how the war was going from the point of view of Canada. So it was the first time that people could actually hear what war sounded like. There's a famous piece of my father broadcasting from the Leary line in Italy, where you can hear him say, "Listen to the guns roar."
Just listen to those guns roar.
And then you hear the guns in the background. So it was actually allowed, and the Canadians were the only ones who had this technology, it actually allowed the Canadians to bring people into the sound of the war in a way that had never happened before.
In the attic of an old Italian farmhouse that overlooks the front as it's on a slight ridge. I'm standing here looking out of a hole in the wall that was made by a shell during the fighting here 2 days ago. This house, though, hasn't really been very badly damaged. It's the only one standing that I've seen for miles around.
Peter Stursberg's landing in Sicily was the first time a Canadian broadcaster had covered Canadian troops on the move. And so he was there for the landing, but wasn't yet able to record. It wasn't until later on that he was able to, with the sound engineer from the CBC, arrive on site and able to record live audio. And it wasn't until he arrived just in time to cover the liberation of one of the key objectives of the Canadian force that landed in Sicily, the town of Yousra, which was liberated in late July 1943. And so he came basically the evening of the battle and was able to get there when the town square had been liberated, and the Seaforth Highlanders of Canada pipe band was playing, the church bells in the background. It was able to broadcast for the first time Canadians liberating European city. After years of really bad news in the wartime news coming from the CBC and elsewhere, this was quite an event. During the Second World War, radio was the only electronic media. There was print reporting, there was certainly newsreel and film that had been around for some time, and photographic reporting was certainly available. But radio was at the cutting edge of technology. It was a way to bring, with only a few hours delay in some cases, or at the least a day or more a delay, reporting of real live sounds from the battlefield into people's living rooms in a way that had never been the case before. This was done through very bulky, by today's standards, portable recording units that weighed dozens of pounds each, that were carted on a jeep that could then be brought to a mobile recording van and all of this sort of thing. But the result was that broadcasters like Stursberg were able to lay live commentary over events as they happened. And other broadcasters like Marcel Ouimet and Matthew Halton and others were able to take the news and layer it over the sounds of Canadians in battle. And that visceral and immediate presence on the battlefield was something that had not yet happened and wouldn't really be surpassed in terms of its impact until later television reporting from war zones and leading up to what we see today. So really, radio was present in people's homes. It was something that, new technology that was kind of in its infancy, and Canadians were really excelling during the Second World War at getting close to the action and being able to layer on reporting and get it back to people at home.
It's a great honor for the School of Journalism and Communication to host the annual Peter Stursberg Foreign Correspondents Lecture. We're in the business here of training young journalists, and down the road, some of them will likely end up reporting from conflict zones. The Stursberg Lecture series is one way of ensuring that when they do, the journalism they produce will be smart and meaningful. Hearing from the best of today's foreign correspondents can't help but inspire journalists of the future to do their best, and hopefully their journalism will also contribute to more informed decision-making around the world.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 9th annual Peter Stursberg Foreign Correspondents Lecture, hosted by Carleton University's School of Journalism and Communication in partnership with CBC Ideas. My name is Alan Thompson, and I'm the head of Carleton's journalism program. I also have a cold, as you may be able to tell, and there's the odd musical interlude that I can hear that's maybe meant to cheer me up. So I'm the head of Carleton's journalism program. The Stursberg is one of our major keynote events, named for the legendary war correspondent Peter Stursberg, and meant to examine the nexus between journalism and conflict. It's wonderful to be once again back in person for this important event, and here in the home of Canada's original journalism school, right in this building. The TV and radio studios are downstairs, classrooms, offices upstairs. In recent years, the pandemic, travel conditions from conflict zones, the vagaries of Canada's visa process have forced us to take the event online. We're so glad to be back in person with such a wonderful crowd, and even the weather has cooperated, providing our keynote speaker with just a nice sprinkling of snow. In just a few moments, we will fully introduce this year's Stursberg Lecturer, Sky News Africa correspondent Yousra Elbagir. Yousra's journey here, in some respects, began in Sudan, a major focus of this evening's presentation. But her trip to Ottawa this week began in Madagascar, where she was covering what some are calling a Gen Z coup or uprising. She's heading from here to Washington to receive the International Women's Media Foundation 2025 Courage in Journalism Award. When you hear her speak, you will know why. I've had the pleasure of spending the last day and a half with Yousra, and it's been phenomenal. I got to listen in the studio while she did an extended podcast interview with my colleague Adrian Harewood, and it was spellbinding. It was truly amazing. While here in Ottawa, Yousra has done numerous media interviews. She's engaged with our journalism students on 3 separate occasions, including a workshop yesterday led by my colleague Matthew Pearson on trauma-informed journalism. Yousra, I just want to thank you before we even begin for everything you've done already in the last day and a half for Carleton, so thank you very much. At this point, let me invite the Dean of the Faculty of Public and Global Affairs, Dr. Brenda O'Neill, to bring some words of welcome from Carleton.
Good evening, everybody. I know you're not here to hear me. I only have a couple of responsibilities this evening. One is simply first to welcome you to Carleton. It's nice to see such a wonderful crowd. And as Alan always reminds me, in this building we have the journalism program, which is the original program here on campus at Carleton. So it's great to see so many of you here for the Peter Stursberg Foreign Correspondents Lecture. I always say one of I think the important things that universities can do is bring the community together with the academics and talk about and question and critique and analyze the important issues of the day. And that's exactly what we're doing tonight. And it's wonderful to have that opportunity. And I was able to meet Richard Stursberg, Peter's son, and thank him for allowing this lecture series. And the 9th, I believe it is, Alan said. So thank you so much for helping Carleton do what I think is so important with the community. The second thing that I have to do is, the second and last thing I have to do is do the land acknowledgement. And I want to recognize that the land on which we're gathering this evening is the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. And as a community, I think we have a responsibility to take that responsibility to heart and to think about, in thinking about truth and reconciliation, what it means to have a land acknowledgement. But I also like to make it very personal by saying, for me, what Canada and this land means for me is about both sides of my family, both the French-Canadian side and the Irish side, having a place where both sides could come and make a better life for themselves. And that's only because of the Aboriginals who provided us, the Indigenous peoples of this country, who provided us with the ability to come here with open arms. And so I always say it's a personal acknowledgement for me, and the responsibility that it reminds us of our individual and collective responsibilities. So thank you for coming. I'm thrilled. I'm anxious to hear what Yousra has to say. So thank you all and welcome.
Thank you, Brenda. Dean O'Neill, thank you. Your support for this event is really appreciated. Peter Stursberg was among the first to cover Canada's troops in the field during the Second World War. He used the latest technology of the day, as you heard, to infuse his radio reports with the sounds of the battlefield. So he was a first in that sense. Peter Stursberg was also the last living Canadian correspondent from the Second World War when he passed away at the age of 101 in 2014. His children, Judith Lowry and Richard Stursberg, created 2 initiatives with Carleton's journalism program to honor their father. The first is the Peter Stursberg Award in Conflict Journalism and Media Studies. This award was intended to help a student in Carleton's Master of Journalism program complete a thesis or journalism project. The second initiative, created by the Stursberg family, is an endowment in support of tonight's event, the annual Stursberg Foreign Correspondents Lecture. Over the years, we've heard from some incredible journalists: Lise Doucette, Janine De Giovanni, Adrian Arsenault, Larry Madowo, Naima Elbagir, Bellingcat investigator Giancarlo Fiorella, Veronika Melkazarova, Shruk Al-Aila, and Gideon Levy. This year's event will add to that canon. Because this lecture celebrates the legacy of Peter Stursberg's work as a war correspondent, I'd like to invite his son, Richard Stursberg, to join us for a moment with a few words on behalf of the family.
Well, thank you, Alan. I'm afraid I'm not dressed for the occasion. just come down from the dark woods of Quebec. Every time I see this, these pictures of my father, it's quite moving and strange for me. He's, of course, very young. He's in his 20s, younger than either of my children are now. I'm very pleased that this has gone on now for 9 occasions. I have to say, I think that the School of Journalism, both Susan when she started it and Alan now that he's carried it on, have managed to attract extraordinarily distinguished speakers. When Alan told me that Yousra was going to be talking this evening, I was very, very pleased to hear that, and I was pleased to hear it for 2 reasons. One is that everybody knows how distinguished Yousra is and how distinguished her career has been. But I was also very pleased because I thought that shining a light on the current crisis in Sudan is enormously important. As you all doubtless know, this is the world's greatest humanitarian catastrophe. And it is, I think it's fair to say, deeply, deeply, deeply underreported. Almost nobody knows what's going on. So I'm very pleased that at the very least this evening, we'll hear from Yousra, we'll hear about Sudan, because I think it's extraordinarily important that everybody understand it. Let me just say also a quick word of thanks to the university as a whole. I'm actually, I actually have a graduate degree from this university, which I got in 1924, when it was a much smaller place. And I also would like to say a word of thanks to the CBC. The CBC has been since the very beginning of the talk, provided both a moderator for the talk or a host, and then the talk has been recorded and turned into a program for ideas that's broadcast every year. So every year the lecture is broadcast on ideas. So my thanks to everybody, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Richard, for your role, and through you, thanks to your family for your generous support for this project. As Richard mentioned, as most of you probably know, the CBC's Nala Ayed was scheduled to moderate tonight's event, which is also being recorded for ideas. Unfortunately, personal circumstances have made it impossible for Nala to moderate the discussion this evening. She sends her regrets and apologies to all those involved and notes that she was very, very much looking forward to tonight's conversation and to once again being part of the Stursberg Lecture. I'd like to extend our best wishes to Nala. My Carleton colleague, Professor Nanaba Duncan, is stepping in to formally introduce our guest speaker and moderate the discussion and the question and answer period. Professor Duncan is the Carty Chair in Journalism, Diversity, and Inclusion Studies here at Carleton. She's also a former CBC broadcaster herself, and here at Carleton recently launched the Marianne Shad Carey Centre for Journalism and Belonging. With that, I would like to turn the evening over to our moderator, Nanaba Duncan.
Thank you so much, Alan. Good evening, everyone. How are you? You ready for this? Yeah, me too. So tonight's proceedings are being recorded for a future episode of CBC Radio's Ideas. You can follow them on social media or subscribe to the newsletter for the date of the broadcast. Peter Stursberg was a legendary war correspondent, as you have heard, for CBC. He was known for his groundbreaking coverage of the Second World War. His pioneering radio reports brought listeners the sounds and voices from the front lines for the first time, conveying the reality of what Canadian troops were facing. That commitment to delivering stories that go beyond the logistics and politics of war is also a hallmark of the work done by tonight's lecturer, Yousra Elbagir. Her most recent reports as the Africa correspondent for Sky News have focused on the civil war in her homeland of Sudan, where she has tirelessly documented the unimaginable scale of devastation in the world's worst humanitarian crisis. I'm going to say it's a war. We're going to talk about that one. We're going to talk about that one. Yousra has done that not only by accurately reporting the number of lives lost and people displaced, but by sharing the individual stories of the humans behind those numbers. It is the same approach that she's taken throughout her career, whether reporting on climate disasters, the global reckoning around Black Lives Matter in Europe and South America, or on the impact of sanctions on people in Sudan. And she's still in her early 30s. She said I was allowed to tell you that. So one can only imagine the stories that Yousra has yet to tell and the impact she'll continue to make in the world. And so for all those reasons, we're really honored to have you here with us tonight. So please join me in welcoming the 2025 Peter Stursberg Foreign Correspondents Lecturer, Yousra Elbagir, whose address is entitled Human Reporting from Sudan and Beyond, a Remedy for Selective Empathy, ?
Wow, I am tall. I have to move them up. Thank you guys for coming. It means a lot to me. So I'm going to start with a series of questions. What number greater than 1 makes the news? How many have to be impacted for the world to care? How many people have to be killed for the bodies and blood to be seen from space? These aren't abstract rhetorical questions. These are questions I've been asking myself over the last few weeks. How do we qualify loss of life in places the world has decided life is cheap? 10 years ago, when I moved back to Sudan, these questions took a different form. It was a time when there was even less media coverage or interest in another doomed dictatorship. And all the humanity that lives between war and peace in my country was flattened and erased. I felt that Sudan needed to be seen as a community, with all its layers and contradictions and complexities, but still a community. So I pitched story after story. A Sufi musician using music to create harmony in areas riddled with tribal rivalry. Wrestlers displaced by state bombardment training for the Tokyo Olympics in the capital. Artists working underground to fight censorship and repression through their artwork. I wanted to separate the people from the state and end the conflation of a dictator with his subjects. There was agency, pride, and resistance in the daily lives of people in our capital, Khartoum, and that erupted into a nationwide revolution in December 2018 that ousted that same dictator. In that peaceful protest encampment, Sudan's national anthem took on a new meaning. Patriotism was being demilitarized. The opening line, "We are the soldiers of God, the soldiers of the nation," went from being a war cry to a call for courage and collective action for the greater good beyond the battlefield. That spirit has helped people survive the war currently tearing Sudan apart. Volunteers faced death to get life-saving supplies into besieged cities. Mutual aid networks support community kitchens in famine zones. Shelters are built by displaced families with their bare hands who share the little they have with their neighbors. These are reminders of the revolution, the goodwill required to face the machinery of the state. Beyond the practical reality of what the revolution meant to the people, it was a reintroduction of Sudan to the world. The fullness of its spirit worth facing bullets for with a bare chest. I came of age reporting on the revolution, and everywhere since, I have searched for the spirit of a place to bring forth in my reporting, prioritizing the lives of the people caught between the guns. In Palestine's West Bank, we covered the killing of 8-year-old grandmother Halima Abu Lail in an Israeli Defense Forces raid. She was buying groceries at the time she was shot and killed in Nablus. A month after we attended her funeral and met her family, CCTV footage emerged that showed the IDF used an ambulance in the raid that killed her. What could have been a clinical investigation was a heartfelt follow-up with hard evidence that led the IDF to admit to a serious offense. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, we covered the fall of the regional capital Goma to M23 rebels. We were trapped in our hotel on the border veranda for 3 days, covering the collapse from a prime vantage point. From there, we were able to document the surrender of Congolese soldiers, heavy artillery being fired from Rwanda, and the handover of Romanian mercenaries. Goma's residents were taking cover in their homes, and we couldn't leave our hotel without getting caught in the gunfire. But as I looked around, I realized the employees of the hotel are the people of Goma, keeping us fed and safe while their city collapsed. When I got home, shocked and grateful to be alive, I wrote a piece for the Sunday Times about the hotel staff who saved our lives as their lives was falling apart. What my team and I are doing, it's not some special superpower. It's the commitment to civilian lives that lives at the heart of public service journalism. I'll be honest, when I started to cover the war in Sudan, I didn't know what I was up against. I naively believed people would respond urgently to such a huge crisis. I watched the humanitarian catastrophe escalate and spread and explode, and there was nothing. There was simply not enough empathy to go around. It was clear I needed to find a way to break some ground, if not for the world to respond to the war, then for the people who are experiencing the worst of it to leave their mark on the record. As I stand here, the death toll of Sudan's war remains unknown. In the first year alone, the number of deaths was estimated to be as high as 150,000 people killed. We don't have an updated death toll, but we have countless horror stories. Millions grieving loved ones lost to armed violence, starvation, disease, and sheer heartbreak, with mass graves visible from space. The statistics that are available are staggering and still do not touch the intensity of the suffering. Of the 12 million people forced out of their homes, many have been displaced more than 2 or 3 times, squeezed into school shelters targeted by drones. Of the 21 million people facing acute food insecurity and famine conditions, many are farmers who fed the country and the region, resorting to eating leaves and animal fodder to stay alive. 14 million children have been out of school since 2023, and we don't know how many of them have been killed, injured, or orphaned. So the question remains, how do we quantify such a huge scale of destruction and dispossession? How can humans emerge from a picture of mass suffering? 10 days ago, I worked on an investigation with a team of journalists on the capture of the historic city of Al-Fashir by the Rapid Support Forces after 18 months of being encircled, starved, and bombarded by them. We were being given death tolls by RSF insiders that range from 7,000 to 14,000 people killed in 5 days. That's 120 hours. While scrambling to verify these figures, my mentor, Rohini Rabi, asked me the question I shared at the start of this lecture. What number greater than 1 makes the news? The lessons of the last decade materialized, and the response was clear. Every single person shot dead by the Rapid Support Forces in the videos we were analyzing to share is worth the thousands of zeros that come after the 1. So how can we share the intense experience of facing war that numbers can never transmit? This is how my team and I have done it. This is Faiza. She's one of the hundreds of thousands of people who've been trapped in Sudan's besieged cities. This is Firdos. She's one of the thousands of children who've died from war injuries. This is Munzir. He's one of the 50,000 missing people separated from their loved ones. We captured these moments of raw human experience to represent the countless people who are suffering in silence. Because in war and in life, each one of us is all of us. Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
I'm sorry for making you cry.
Oh, I don't think, thank you, I don't. It's nothing that you have to be sorry about. Our tears are for them. So I do want to talk about some of the very big, important questions that you've posed. But let's go back to the beginning of your career, which, despite everything you've accomplished, it started a decade ago, 10 years ago. Let's go from the moment that you came back to Sudan from the UK. You've just gotten your degree from St. Andrews, and this is your degree in social anthropology. What were your expectations about the kind of work you were going to do?
I didn't really have any expectations, but I definitely knew there was a lot to do. Like, I knew that there had been so little coverage. It was after the North and the South had split. It was after an election that was considered rigged. And there was just a discarding, you know? Sudan was just going to do what Sudan does, and no one was really going to engage. So when I went back in 2015, I really had so much to play with. There was a lot that wasn't being covered, and I actually did the opposite of what I do now. I went for the positive stories. I went for the stories that had agency and, you know, people celebrating, and, you know, culture stories, and really just things that people wouldn't expect from Sudan, you know, that people had assumed that we just didn't have. So that was really fun, because it felt like I was reintroducing myself to Sudan and learning about Sudan as an adult. And my parents would hear me listening to Sudanese funk from the 70s and be like, what is she doing? But it was cool because they could see.
What did that mean for them?
They loved it. They were like, okay, she has, you know, she can see all the promise in Sudan and everything that they knew Sudan was, and that kind of post-independence dream. And, you know, everyone was organizing and expressing, and there was a huge renaissance in Khartoum at the time. And it was just great to be a part of it.
You've talked about how you wanted to move past the overworked images of famine, poverty, and war in Africa, which I imagine is why you would do some of those stories. But why was that really important for you?
It's so harmful to, these tropes and these images, they actually completely degrade the whole range of identities that exist in a country. I was telling a friend the other day, a colleague, I'm so proud that we've managed to cover the famine in Sudan without a single emaciated skeletal child. That we covered it through farmers. You know, it doesn't have to be, there can be dignity in war and in conflict and poverty. People don't have to completely lose their agency or be exposed in that way. And it doesn't mean that those images of starving children aren't important to share, but people are desensitized now. There have been so many cycles of that, and nothing changes. So why are we still using the same images and expecting the same reaction?
When you
expecting a different reaction, sorry.
A different reaction. So you're doing these stories, and they're more sort of human. And when it comes time, when Omar al-Bashir is ousted, then you find yourself doing different kinds of stories. What was that change like for you?
As in covering conflict?
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's not conscious, because it makes it as if it's an impulse. You don't feel like there's a choice, really. You know, and it's not in a bad way. It's in a kind of a call to action way, where I went back to Sudan 3 weeks before the protest started, end of November 2018. I just knew I quit my job at Vice. I knew I had to be in Sudan.
But what called you though? How did you know?
It's like a tug, you know? It's like, you just feel like you're and I still get that. I'll go to Sudan and then something big will happen in my family, or a loved one will pass away and I'll have just seen them just before, and I feel like it's just it's just the call of the homeland, you know? You just gotta go, and you gotta go.
So when things started to happen, did you realize, okay, this is why I'm here?
I don't think I even thought of it, you know? It's not oh, I'm here to save this. It's just oh, I got to get to work, you know? Things are happening.
Do you remember the first story you did?
In Sudan? Nuba wrestlers, yeah.
No, the first story about the conflict.
About the conflict, oh my gosh, that first day, that morning, Saturday morning, it was just like, that's what's so crazy, is that it was just a Saturday morning, end of Ramadan, very sleepy, and it's just suddenly like, is this real? Is this happening? And so it's a call to my parents, it's a call to my closest people, and then it's, oh, I need to make calls, I need to write something. And you still don't know it's a war, right? You still think it's like an eruption of violence that can end the next day or in a few hours.
Was that the actual story? Like what were you actually
Oh, it was
reporting
just
on?
like fighting erupts in Khartoum.
Okay.
But no one knows how extended or how intense it is. Everyone's just in their homes, holed up, waiting for it to end. And we've had bouts of like 3-day riots or 3-day lockdowns or 3-day, and it's never, like 2.5 years, I would have never believed it. And I think there are these pivotal moments in the conflict where you realize, oh, we are actually going in for the long haul, you know, or this is actually getting worse and worse and worse. And those moments have been like Al-Fashir collapsing. That's a huge moment of understanding how deep we are. Before that, it was the fall of Madani, which is, you know, the second city in the center of Sudan. And before that, it was obviously the fall of Khartoum. And so we've had these chapters where the gravity of what we're going through lands. But that first morning, I'd be lying if I told you that I knew. I'd be sitting here 2.5 years in talking to you about a war that's still ongoing.
When did you start to get the sense that this was serious?
It definitely, December 2023 when Madani fell. So Madani became a humanitarian hub. It's kind of where everyone from Khartoum and all the kind of humanitarian organizations and all the medical, like the hospitals, all of them relocated to Madani from Khartoum, and it became like, I wouldn't say a wartime capital, but genuinely a sanctuary city. And so when Madani collapsed, it was the despair and the feeling, everyone felt re-traumatized from Khartoum collapsing. And then I went to, my second trip to the capital was in February 2024, and I remember the feeling of like deep despair and hopelessness that everyone was feeling. And there was a comms blackout. We landed, and the telecommunications in the entirety of Sudan just collapsed, like was shut down. Where, you know, there are conflicting reports, but I can say, you know, it was the Rapid Support Forces shutting down telecommunications from the capital Khartoum because the hub was in their area of control. And it was funny because we arrived and our Starlink was in transit. So we had to figure out a way to get our Starlink in and actually operate. But the feeling of suffocation and being cut off and not knowing when this was going to end was at such a peak 10 months in, because that is the point where you're close to a year of war and you're like, how did we get here? How is this not ending? And all the promises we heard in the first few days of, oh, it's just going to be a few weeks. Oh, it's just going to, like all of those promises obviously felt naive and hollow, and people were really scrambling to survive.
What was the naivete about?
You know, you want to believe. And it's, I mean, my mom asked me, should I leave the key under the mat in front of the door? You know, these are the things. People leave their passports when they flee. They think they're going to go back home. People leave their documents. Like, no one expects that they're going to have to start a new life somewhere else. And this is what always is really tough when I hear debates around immigration in the West. It's like, do you think people want to leave their homes? Do you really think that you want to leave your place where you want to be buried and you want to raise your kids? And no, it's, you know, as Warsan Shire says, it's when home is the mouth of the shark. And that's, you know, and we have had so many elderly die in displacement just from that feeling of depression and despair that they're not going to be buried back home in Sudan.
You mentioned your mom, and I want to take just a step back. People may not know that you come from a family of storytellers. Your father's a well-known journalist. Your mother was the first woman publisher in Sudan, and your older sister Nima is a correspondent for CNN, who previously delivered a Stursberg Lecture here. So how have those relationships and that learning. It's like in your blood. How has that shaped you?
I think like storytelling is a very Sudanese trait, I'll be honest. Like it's like everyone likes to sit around.
Somebody said yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone loves to sit around and tell jokes and talk and like I watched my dad with his newspaper in Sudan fight for that newspaper. And I think I could see and I kind of imbibed how important it was to have a space to talk about these things and address the issues in our country and have a sense of ownership over what was going on. I still didn't want to necessarily be a journalist when I was young. I wanted to do like archaeology and there was a rebellion in me that wanted to move away from it. But I think over time I just really leaned into it where I could feel that I don't have to necessarily do it the same way that my parents and my sister and my grandfather, they all found their way to do it. And that I want to do this, and how do I do it in a way that feels genuine? And so, yeah, I still just tell the stories that I want to tell. I'm covering war, but I'm covering it the way that I want to cover it. And I think that's really important. There's no template of like, no, a war correspondent talks like this.
Right.
And also, I don't even feel like a war correspondent, right? I feel like a reporter who just happens to be covering quite a few number of wars. But I just think that the ideas that we have around what a journalist is and what they sound like, it leaves little room for like innovation or any sense of originality, which I think people are sick of. Like people just want to hear like a genuine person speak about things in a genuine way.
With your parents and the work that they did, they were working in a place where freedom of the press was perhaps non-existent. So what did you learn from that?
When I moved back 10 years ago, it was exactly the year that my dad's newspaper got shut down for good. And just before...
Because he wanted to?
No, it was shut down by the government.
Shut down? Okay.
Yeah, it was shut down by the government. But I remember there was a national dialogue happening that year. And we had a really great cartoonist working for the newspaper that I've known since I was a kid, Karuri. And he did a cartoon of the national dialogue.
What do you mean by national dialogue, in case people don't know?
It's exactly it's like basically people gathered around talking, but it was extremely censored and closed. So it was hilarious because it was like national dialogue, and then in the cartoon, the national dialogue, and this is very misogynistic, but it's like, think of it within the context, where the national dialogue is this like beautiful curvy woman and all these men are like chasing after her, like this glamorous idea of like, and then that cartoon came out. And the president, Umar al-Bashir, sent someone to be like, Al-Sheikh says don't touch the national dialogue. And I remember, and I was like, isn't this the opposite of dialogue? Like, why are you censoring a cartoon about... So the way that the censorship comes out, it's almost like instinctive. It doesn't even feel like it's an intentional silencing. It's just like, no, don't talk about that. Because it was so imbibed at that point in the system and the state to be like, for example, there was a cholera outbreak and it kept being called acute watery diarrhea. It's like, no, that's cholera, So there are just so many ways where there's this like silencing through stigma and through social pressure and then obviously through law and punishing journalists and punishing people for speaking out and activists. So then obviously the way that the law is used is incredibly repressive. So 2015, when I moved back, there were two Khartoums. There was the state repression and suffocation, and then there was this amazing, movement and push to like break through that. And that's when I think that was really like the seeds of the revolution. 2013, there were protests. They were shut down very quickly. It's estimated that 200 people were killed to just shut down those protests over a few days. 2016, more protests, student protests from subsidy lifts that started to really, austerity measures started to really impact people. And then 2019, end of 2018, 2019 is when we saw the revolution really kind of come out nationwide. So it was super cool to be there during those, the emerging of the protest and the growth of it into the revolution.
And you said that the Sudanese people who rose up are part of the goodwill required to face the machinery of the state. Why is goodwill required? What do you mean by that?
So we have a lot of practices, right, in Sudan that are a buffer from, the hardship that is seen to be almost like part and parcel, but it shouldn't be. But like, for example, when someone passes away or there's any sort of need within the neighborhood, everyone will gather and, we'll get to it. There are floods, there's a lot of organizing, and it's called nafir, and people, share, and that goodwill basically ensures the survival of the community. And during the revolution, the resistance committees that organized protests and treated injured protesters and were, part of really mobilizing through different neighborhoods, they turned into the emergency response rooms, who are now nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize 2 years in a row and are feeding and helping 3 million people at least. So those frameworks that helped during times of intense hardship, and those ones are built on times even further back of difficulty and regime changes and all these things. These things have now been built. They kind of are aggregated into what is now a network of people relying on each other. US aid has been cut. The UN funding is at an all-time low. The UN itself doesn't really go to places that are difficult to reach. The UN wasn't in Khartoum the first 2 years of the war until the army took it back from the rapid support forces. So actually, the war has not only cemented the goodwill, but has been, tried and tested by the goodwill. Do you know what I mean? Like,
it's like they've built these communities.
They've built the structures that keep the community alive.
There was a lot of hope after the regime was toppled, but not long after, you were one of the first people to raise concerns about the transition of power. What were you concerned about?
I was concerned about the fact that I felt like it was it felt like it was a masking of the issues that needed to be addressed. So the protest encampment that ousted Omar al-Bashir was massacred on June 3rd, 2019. And this is a peaceful protest encampment that's been in front of the military headquarters for close to 2 months. People from all over Sudan gathered after Omar al-Bashir was ousted to ensure that there would actually be deep change, right? That the state would change, that there would be civilian rule. What we noticed is that after the massacre, there was this power sharing agreement, but there was really no serious effort for there to be any justice for the people who lost their lives during the revolution. Everything was kind of being put to, it's not the time. We were speaking about representation of women in the Sovereign Council and in different kind of political entities that were being formed and commissions and all of these things to oversee the revolution, the transition, post-revolution. But it seemed like there was just no impetus beyond sharing power to actually bring about the change that people had died for and were protesting for. So it wasn't that I was just critical, I think I was disappointed, because I felt like the civilian opposition leaders had wielded the protests to get a seat at the table and then did nothing with that seat for the people that were out there risking their lives.
So what was it that you noticed about the women? What was their role?
The women were at the forefront of the protests. I mean, young men were a majority of the protesters. They were getting injured and killed, but women were putting themselves out there on the front line. Just consistently, and they were organizing, and we were seeing a real integrated crowd. Like, it was people from all around the country coming out, and it didn't matter in the protest who was from where, and all the kind of typical, segregation that we would see in the capital. A lot of the times, economic and social segregation had been really eroded by the revolution. And it was incredible to see. And I think that's why I keep coming back to it, because it held a lot of what Sudan could be and wanted to be. And when we saw people come together, it was clear that the division was manufactured, that actually people happily came together, and that Khartoum was a city for everyone, that there wasn't, that the elite and the political elite were genuinely the 1%, right? They're not the majority. So women were out there, and I will also say what was incredible is that there were very few cases of sexual harassment in the mass protests that happened. Women felt safe to go out and protest. There was a lot of camaraderie and solidarity, and it didn't feel like they felt safe to be out there with other young people.
I'm just looking at you, Alan, because I need you to give me the 5 minutes, okay? Because otherwise we're gonna.
Yeah, we're just gonna keep talking.
The other thing is that I want you all to know that you all have a chance to ask some questions as well. I want to talk about the idea of selective empathy, which is part of the title of the lecture. You say that as you were watching the current humanitarian catastrophe escalate, and you saw the corresponding lack of response, you came to the realization that there simply was not enough empathy to go around. What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's a combination of compassion fatigue, but it's also this real fallacy that we can only focus on one thing at a time, that we can only organize for one cause at a time. But I mean, we've spoken about this. I think that the way that Sudan is used to deflect from Gaza is also really frustrating and harrowing, because why can't you be upset about Gaza and Sudan and Ukraine and the Congo and That's what for me is so bewildering, because I don't think that we have a limited capacity to care about different countries and different conflicts and different areas of need. If anything, there should be kind of an integrated approach in how we deal with these conflicts without collapsing them into each other. There are obviously different conflicts from different causes, sources of conflict, but I just think that there is a real hyper-focus on certain things that appeal to our own interests. And I think that the way people respond to, Gaza as something between, as an issue with the West, and that's something they can resonate with, and then they kind of abandon everything else, when actually, when you look at the core of why Gaza needs to be addressed, that level of human suffering is unacceptable. That's the same for Sudan, and that's the same for Ukraine and Yemen and a lot of other places. So I think it's just this kind of altruistic self-interest that drives a lot of what we empathize with and what we don't. And I really feel like that's fundamentally harmful.
What do you think is the impact of us framing it in that way, that we should be choosing?
I mean, I find it really limiting. So the world is as small as it's ever been, right? We're in an increasingly shrinking world. And I really think the problem with thinking that the conflict in Sudan is somewhere far away is so short-sighted, because it ends up on your doorstep in many ways that you might not imagine. So when my mom told me this story, and I keep thinking about it these days, which is when the Ethiopia-Eritrea war was happening, their friends who are Eritrean opposition leaders came to Sudan for refuge. And one of the things that they told them was, just watch out, this can happen to you. And my mom was like, we really didn't think it would happen to us, right? But I find war is actually the most common experience. It's one of the most common human experiences, and the idea that war won't happen to you, or that it's something that you can't relate to, or something that you'll never experience, is just, it's kind of delusional, to be honest, because that's not the world we live in anymore. War can erupt anywhere, and I think thinking that things are siloed and segregated is just not, it's not safe.
Why don't people care about Sudan?
I think people think Sudan has just always been like this. I think there's an assumption that Sudan is just a dysfunctional place that is never gonna, a hopeless place. I've actually heard people say that, oh, what a hopeless place.
To you?
To me.
And what do you say?
I say, I honestly, I think one time someone said that, and I said, it's a great place. People love Sudan. And I think the shock is this idea that warmth and love and celebration and all the things that I associate with Sudan, Sudanese people associate with Sudan, the fact that that can't exist or doesn't exist is shocking. And that's where when I went back, and that was a big part of what I wanted to share about Sudan, because I found it so strange that people didn't think that that would exist there. Because why wouldn't it?
What else is it about Sudan that you think people don't care about?
I don't think people think about Sudan in the sense of I care about this or I don't care about that in Sudan. I think that Sudan represents something to a majority of people that I think the international media has a big responsibility for, right? This idea that when people were covering the Darfur genocide in the early 2000s, they weren't looking at agency of people in these areas as well. That was when you kind of get those images of starving children and burnt villages and all these things that do need to be covered and do exist, but how we tell them matters. So when people from Darfur become this like faceless mass of suffering, and there's no actual individual stories or individual, like legacies of people who have courage, who have faced hardship, who are still there, who moved back after the early 2000s once, and now being displaced again. This is the fundamental issue with how we cover conflicts in places like Africa, is that there is a real erasure that happens within the coverage where there's just nothing to hold on to later. There's no sense. I think if certain conflicts were covered properly, with nuance and with care, I think it wouldn't be so quick to forget them and move on. I think the cycles repeat themselves and they get worse, and there's almost a sense of like, oh, it's happening again, hands up, we have nothing to do with this. The journalists that covered the genocide in the early 2000s, a lot of them look back on it and can barely remember, the people that they met, right? And now it's happening again, and they just see it as another reiteration of it, but it's not, it's far worse. So there needs to be some real careful handling of conflicts in places like Sudan, where there's an understanding that there's a responsibility to ensure that these stories leave a mark. And how do we do that?
Well, for you, it has to do with human reporting, which is the way that you've kind of characterized it. And that's by focusing on single stories of individuals. And that approach comes to you through your spiritual teacher.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
So when I met my spiritual teacher, Rohini, I had just covered the revolution, and I was incredibly, I would say I felt just hollow, and I felt really saddened that all the work and all the difficulty that I'd reported on I felt like it hadn't made a difference. And working with her, so before I got this job at Sky, but generally working with her to understand how to do this and still maintain a sense of purpose. It's not necessarily about the outcome. It's about the fact that I'm doing this from a certain place.
Did you come to her with that question? Like, were you saying, how do I do this with purpose?
I came to her thinking that being a journalist was who I was, that was my identity, that I am a journalist. But
where's that from?
It's just an idea that I internalized, and I thought, okay, who are you? She asked, and I said, I'm a journalist. And she was like, no, you're not a journalist. You manifest as you practice journalism, you work as a journalist. So I think what's been amazing working with her is, one, finding my own voice and finding what I love and finding out how to bring that through my work. But also the spiritual foundation of the fact that we're all humans. We all are of a shared spirit. Mm-hmm. We can all connect with each other. That the grief of a mother in Brazil from police brutality is the same as a grief of a mother in Sudan from police brutality, from violence, from security forces. And that, the sharing of these stories is a reminder that we are all one and that we're all in this together. And I think that is, the mysticism that lives in storytelling has been amazing to explore. And without her, one, I would be, not alive, because I would have been unsafe somewhere very dangerous. But two, I wouldn't be able to do this with as much conviction and care because I would have genuinely felt that unless I got a certain outcome, which is the war ending or the revolution leading to democracy and, then what's the point of me doing this, or who am I if it doesn't work out that way? And so just detaching as well and knowing that it's about the process and the journey as opposed to a fixed outcome. And also, who knows what the correct outcome really is,
You mentioned detaching. Does that have to do with mysticism, or is that?
Yeah, it does. So the detaching is a sense of, the whole thing of like surrendering and just letting go and detaching from ideas and things that seem to matter, but actually, sometimes I go and I think I'm going to get this story or I'm going to do this, and something completely different comes up. I went to Sudan in October 2024, not knowing the day after I arrived that I'd be able to cross the bridge over the Nile for the first time after, a year and a half of not being able to do that because of the RSF being in the center of the city. So letting go of whatever I thought I was going to go and cover and just going and doing what I was meant to do at the time, I think is fundamentally a surrendering to what I meant to go and do. And I think control and like wanting to, like I said, the idea of what a war correspondent is or what a journalist is for me really limiting, because I would never have thought 10 years ago that I would have done all the things that I've done or been able to handle a lot of the things that I've faced.
And do you feel that you've been able to handle it because of this approach and this spiritual?
Yeah.
So how did that come into play in the toughest moments? I'm thinking about how does one detach when you're going back to your home and it is ransacked?
I don't think detachment is like avoidance. I think in that moment of going back to my house, I spent a lot of time asking myself why I was sharing it and what my motivation was, because I really didn't want to do it for the wrong reasons.
Mm-hmm. Just to back up, to tell everybody that you had gone back to your house with a camera, and you were going back to just see
if it was there.
If it was there.
Yeah. So, and I got this question yesterday in a couple of the interviews of the process of sharing something so intimate, and journalists often not wanting to be in the center of the story. And there's a lot that happens that I don't share, but when I do share, it's not that it's like strategic, but it's intentional. It's like, this really is important to share because people need to know how many people are impacted. People need to know that my house is everyone else's house. And going in, it was really about letting myself feel whatever I was going to feel and being honest with it. And that, even just the process of facing, I would check Google Earth every 2 weeks just to make sure it was still there and there was no charred marks on it, and would always dream about my house twice a week.
Going into it?
Going into it. Sometimes there are people there. Sometimes I dream that, I couldn't get in. And then the last dream I had before I went was that I got in, but I was told I couldn't go upstairs. And so when I did end up going, my dad's cupboard was blocking the staircase. Oh. So I actually then we had to climb over it.
And what was there?
It's just ransacked. It was ransacked, but I had seen so many houses like that already. So by the time I got to my house, there was just a feeling of okay, this is all of us. These are all of our houses. There was also, did I tell you that crazy story where I went into a house, the last trip before I was able to cross the bridge. So every trip I'd get kind of closer to the center of Khartoum, but we couldn't cross. So first trip, we finally crossed the bridge into Bahri, but we were in the very top north part of Bahri, and then eventually was able to go a little bit closer, but couldn't cross the bridge that takes me right to my house. But in that last trip before I went home, I went into the house of someone in Kafuri, and we filmed it. And I knew when...
Wait, this is someone you knew, or?
No. So it was just a home.
Yeah.
I had a feeling that when I would share it, that someone would say, hey, this is my house. So I was waiting for it. I was waiting for someone to message me and be like, that's my house. So I got the message from someone saying, hey, this is my home, can we talk? But when I checked the message before, and I'd been to Bahri, but I hadn't gone that far south, she had sent a message 6 months before to say, hey, are you gonna go to Kafuri? And if you do, can you go see my house? And then I went to her house.
Wow.
And then we got on the phone and we spoke about it. And I just consoled her and we spoke about her house. And then the next time I went, it was to my house.
Did you share your experience with her?
We texted. And she was like, you did it. I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, being a Sudanese-British journalist who's reporting in Sudan gives you a lot of expertise, but for some people, it can complicate things. In North America, journalists have faced accusations of bias when they're covering communities that they belong to. Has that come up for you?
Sometimes I face this assumption, you know, with colleagues in the UK that, oh yeah, you can get in because you're Sudanese, you know, you kind of, you know how to navigate it. And I have to kind of be like, do you know how difficult every time is to go back and to face what's there?
And you say that?
I've said that. I said to one colleague, and actually a very well-respected journalist who I like, but I said, you know, every trip feels like a pilgrimage. And she's like, yeah, I know, but you know the language and da, da, da. And I was just like, okay. I got it.
What did she mean by that?
She just meant that it's just easier to navigate. Because I'm Sudanese and I know the language and I know, I mean, I have contacts and I can move around and I think there's a truth obviously to that, but the difficulty is obviously much deeper than navigating a hostile environment. So I think that kind of feeds back to what we've been talking about, that people kind of see our countries as like a notch on the belt, you know, another war zone, you know, have you done Sudan? And then that's how it's talked about, but then that comes through as well in the reporting, that it's just another war zone.
There was a young boy that you interviewed in the documentary on the 1-year anniversary of the conflict. He was about 9 or 10. He was Sudanese American, and he said, I feel like a traitor for leaving Sudan. And I suspect this is something that you hear a lot and maybe even struggle with yourself. What feelings do you get about, or do you have about going to Sudan, leaving Sudan, and the responsibility that you might have?
It's funny because when I met the students at Alan's lecture earlier, they asked me what the hardest thing about covering the war is, and I said getting to leave or leaving at the end and feeling like everyone's still there dealing with it. But that over time, it's survivor's guilt. I also had it with the revolution when I left and the massacre happened. But the survivor's guilt is a bit indulgent, I have to say, I realized with time. I mean, me being able to leave gives me the resources and the privilege that means I can go back safely again and again and again. And I can't take what I want from that and then try and discard or dismiss the rest. Like that privilege has allowed me to do so much in terms of going back and reporting.
So you're saying that it's indulgent to engage in the feeling of guilt?
No, to wallow in the feeling of guilt.
Okay.
So, you know, I mean, it feels weird and it feels like, but I personally feel like, okay, I have a certain positioning that I'm wielding and I'm using, and a lot of people in the diaspora are organizing and raising money and sending money back home and supporting emergency response rooms and doing so much in the space that they're in. And that's where God wants you to be now to help. You know, that's what kind of I come back to of, this is clearly where, I'm based in Johannesburg and not London for this period. And weirdly, it feels like, oh, that's also a nice base for me right now, rather than being in the UK, but being in South Africa. So I'm still on the continent, but there's enough distance for me to just charge up and then go back.
I'm going to put the questions to you all now. So you can put your hand up and Alan will run to you. But before you go ahead.
We have 2 microphones. My colleague Brett and I have sort of divided the room. So my only ground rule, and this isn't about grammar, a question is a sentence with a question mark at the end of it. Just to remind you. And
so I'll add that means it's just one sentence. It's just one. As we figure out who we're going to, this may be a bit of a bigger question, but we haven't talked about it. You talked about race being part of the selective empathy. Can you say more?
Yeah, I mean, anti-blackness is rampant, and it is a, you know, if the hierarchy of lives, Black Muslims aren't at the top, you know, that's the reality. And I think what's been really interesting is the fact that, you know, the solidarity that we have been getting has been coming from places where people are going through a lot. So there's been solidarity from Gaza, there's been solidarity from the Congo. It's almost like you when you're going through it, you know that people need that support and that sense of, you know, we're here and we see what's going on as well. And so that's been amazing to see. But I also think that there are obsessions at the moment with, you know, I mean, Trump is obviously consuming the news.
What? Who's that guy?
Yeah, we don't know. But really, like, there's so much energy going into certain news stories, which it just takes, I mean, it adds to the fatigue, right? Everyone's like waiting to see what's going to happen next in the US, and that all of that does kind of make it difficult to penetrate the firewall. Another thing is that when I first joined the Africa Bureau, everyone was obsessed with Wagner, you know, the mercenary group, the Russian mercenary group. There was just this obsession with Wagner. So it's like, is Wagner in Sudan? You know, then that's a story. So there's just these weird like moments and fads that actually make it really difficult for there to be empathy or understanding for anything else.
We have our first question.
I may not be able to get back up again. Pass the microphone.
Thank you, Yousra, for being here. I'm Abyssinia, and so you mentioned your role and your team's role as a journalist to capture those raw and human experiences and putting the human at the center of your stories. And I'm wondering if you've ever felt, while capturing those videos and images, have you ever felt that an experience has been so raw and so like almost sacred that you just felt like I can't put this on video? And how do you balance that with the sense of duty that you feel for your country and to have that empathy from the world?
That's a good question. There's so much that happens off camera. Like a lot happens off camera. In the sense of feeling, so, I mean, even sharing the things that I find sacred feel weird because I'm sharing them, but I think it's a small enough room. But Firdos, the child that you saw in the video, she, you know, we filmed with her, and it was actually my teacher who was like, check on her. So we went looking for her, and she'd been transferred to a different hospital. And so we found her in Omdurman Teaching Hospital. And when her mom wasn't there, and I left my number, and her mom called me and she needed blood. And miraculously, the producer and my producer and cameraman on the trip were both her blood type, O positive and O negative, which, as we know, is very rare. So they donated blood for her. And so we go to the Children's Hospital, and they donate the blood. And we get the blood for her, and this is again kind of back to the outcomes. You know, we were like, okay, the blood, like, stay alive. We need her to survive. And she actually, after holding on for 3 months and suffering from her wounds, passed away peacefully. And her mother, you know, actually was so frantic. But when she called me to tell me that she'd passed away, had this like crazy, like, not relief, but like a real sense of like gratitude and peace in her voice, of just like, she's no longer suffering, and thank you guys and all this stuff. And that's, you know, that was a real thing that I'm gonna carry for the rest of my life. One, of following up with people, and you never know what their needs are, and the fact that you can help. And two, that what we think is like the best thing, we just never know what the best thing for someone is, you know, and that actually she'd been suffering for so long.
How did the guys feel?
I mean, we were all just like, oh my gosh, I mean, we were all really sad, and we just kind of grieved her, and we just, obviously, just had to keep it moving.
Yeah. Thank you.
I heard you on Alan Neil's show yesterday, I think,
cool.
Yes? This morning on the radio, which I listen to often, there was a report that Canada, arms made in Canada are in Sudan. I heard it once, maybe at 8 o'clock. Anyway, it never came on again. I mean, like that report was never really, so there is a kind of silence. Also, when Francesca Albanese was in Canada, I mean, she was more or less, well, talking about Palestine so much, and the government of Canada, well, refused to see her, so she said. I'm just wondering, do you think Canada has a free and open media?
I've been in Canada for a day and a half. No, I'm just, to have Francesca Albanese? Okay. I think what's a good point is Canada's role with the arms. We were discussing this, you know, 7 million Canadian dollars last year in arms exports to the UAE, which we know and have proven backs the rapid support forces. But I think one thing that in terms of Canada, you know, among other countries that work with the UAE is this real understanding that if you leave the UAE to continue to support the rapid support forces militarily and politically without any ramifications, then you are aiding, abetting in Sudan's war. And I think that really needs to be clear and reiterated to governments around the world, that the West is playing with a very nefarious actor.
You know, these folks don't know, but you've had opportunity to speak to folks in government in other countries to try and talk to them about what's happening in Sudan. Can you tell us a little bit about Germany? Or no?
It was Chatham House rules generally, but it's okay. But generally, I think what we keep coming up against is an unwillingness from countries in the West to hold the UAE to account, that the investments the UAE has made in the countries economically is too valuable, and also that their priorities have been in terms of just focusing on domestic issues and making sure that the far right doesn't, you know, engulf them. So, yeah, what I've faced nonstop is that everyone wants to kind of have a moment of outrage over the war in Sudan, but doesn't want to actually address the actors that are driving the war.
Right. I'm Professor Taj Al-Khazina. I'm an associate professor at Norman Patterson School for International. Normally in such situations of level 4 violence and conflict, there is the humanitarian envelope and there is the political and security envelopes. And normally they should not be mixed. In your reporting, where do you feel that the media and the Friends of Sudan have failed to the extent that nobody really cares? I just told you about my interaction with this advisor in the White House who told me that we have passed the stage of donor fatigue. We are now in a stage of compassion fatigue.
So what is the question again?
The question is, in her practice, there are two envelopes. There is the humanitarian envelope and there is the political and security envelope. Where do you think that the media has failed or not failed in highlighting either of those? If you mix them, you have got trouble. And as I told you that in the CPA, Comprehensive Peace Agreement, they were completely separate.
So what do you think?
So I personally focus on the humanitarian situation as a result of the political situation. So I mix them. I definitely mix them, but I think it's important to just focus on the civilians. So that's been a big part of what I've been doing. I think generally the international media has, I would say there has been reporting on Sudan. There has been, more than a lot of other places, but there hasn't been like sustained attention, right? The few channels go back and back and back. They'll send one team, will go once, they'll hit it, and then they won't really pay attention to it. Again, it's kind of checked off the list.
Yeah.
So I think it's about sustained coverage that develops. So it's not you just go, it's the follow-ups, it's the monitoring. And I think that takes, I wouldn't say expertise, but real interest from people inside newsrooms around the world to say, okay,
intention.
An intention. And a lot of the foreign correspondents who used to go to Sudan regularly are no longer active, who've retired or they're in different fields. So I think there just actually needs to be investment in the war and an understanding that, you need to send the same people back. I mean, with Sky News, they obviously send me back again and again, but, a lot of newsrooms don't invest. It's a very expensive trip. You need security, you need this. So I think now that there's more attention globally, we're at a moment where there's attention, how can that be sustained? This moment of care and engagement. And it also takes access, and that's also not consistent. So as soon as people try to get in and they can't, they're gonna just leave it. And so in the first year of war, there was barely any media coverage because people weren't able to access. Post-February 2024, more international media outlets went into Khartoum, into Durman and Bahri, and we saw more coverage.
Because they were allowed.
Because they could, yeah. Because no one wants to reveal that they can't get into a place.
We're going to talk more about access in a minute because I think you get some in a way that maybe some people don't. But we have a question here.
We have 3 or 4 on deck, so just to let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's often the narrative of civil war, and you talked about the conflation of people with dictatorship. Whether it's probable or not is another question, but what changes need to happen in the international media to humanize and bring nuance to narratives surrounding Sudan?
I mean, I think it's hiring people who care. My colleagues and I, we have this running joke where it's like, okay, that person gives a crap. Okay, that person doesn't give a crap. And
how do you tell?
You can tell. You can tell from people's reporting if they give a crap. Some people are really good at acting like they care, but they don't care. Some people can't act like they care and they don't care. And some people care and maybe you don't know that they care, but they actually care. I mean, you really, I think we forget how subconscious our responses are to news reports. And I mean, obviously, that's been wielded for votes, and with a lot of populism, they're appealing to subconscious fear and all these things. But the reality is, when you watch a news report about something like the war in Sudan, you should feel touched, you should feel moved, you should feel compelled. And if that doesn't happen, I mean, it's either bad technically or it's bad in terms of where someone's reported it from, how they've done it.
But also, no matter how good it is, it's possible that there might be selective empathy on the side of the viewer.
I think you can break through that. I genuinely believe that you can break through that. I think the selective empathy comes in when it's like, okay, what am I engaging with? I'm not, I'm gonna just scroll past this. And then I watch it and I feel it for a moment and then I override it because I just can't deal with another conflict in the world, it's just too much. These responses can override. And when I've spoken to policymakers, there are moments where I can see that they're like, oh, the humanity in them is activated and they start to feel something. And then they suddenly are like, oh, but the budget and da-da-da. And then they just suddenly
oh, how interesting.
Yeah, you see them
You can tell that you've broken through, but then what is it, just?
Override.
Priorities that they know about?
It's like watching a system overload in a robot or something. I can't explain it. You just see them be like, oh, no, we can't care. We don't have the capacity.
We have a question on this side, but just before we do, could you explain a little bit about how, we've spoken about this before, because your parents were amazing, there is some privilege in the name that you have.
Yeah.
So what kind of access have you gotten because of Elbagir?
So in the very beginning of the war, it was interesting because it was like, you know, to get to the consulate in Saudi. So firstly, to get to Saudi, there was no privilege involved. It was literally the work of our amazing international editor who got us visas to go and cover the evacuation vessel. It's in the embassy in Sudan trying to get visas for, like, you know, 3 white people. And I'm like, listen, just trust me, I can take care of this. So getting into those rooms using, you know, that was in the very beginning critical, and I knew that, and I knew like they know who my dad is and who my family are, so they know they can come find me if things go wrong.
I see.
You know, and it's really how like social memory works in Sudan. It's like background checks, you know? Oh yeah, okay, this person.
Like I know her people.
Exactly, and because my dad's very public facing, they could kind of be like, okay, we kind of know what she's about, we're gonna take a chance. But once I got on that ferry and got in, 2 weeks into the war when literally there were no flights, nothing. After that, it was pure graft. Like it was finding the Red Sea commander. It was going and sitting down with him. It was basically telling him, I need to get in, and this is really important. And him being like, well, and very much trying to be like, well, you're gonna follow the line of the army? And I'm like, no, I'm going to care for civilians. And there being respect in that. You know, I think it's really interesting sometimes when you sit in front of military men and they respect integrity and being like, no, I'm gonna do my job and I'm going to tell the stories of the civilians and you're gonna also let me in because this needs to happen. So that was, I think that kind of broke through the initial, and then once you have that track record of, okay, she went to the capital and she didn't get killed and she didn't, come out and say lies.
You're building credibility.
And then, and then now at the point where I can push for things.
Thank you.
We have a question over here.
You've spent a lot of time in Sudan, and you mentioned earlier that you never expected the conflict to happen. So I just want to ask, would you say you never expected as a citizen? If so, is this because they kind of normalize it or hide it among the citizens? As an Ethiopian Canadian, my family always talks about the conflicts back home, and I don't know if it's because I'm bubbled in Canada or because I'm not sure what's happening, but they talk about it like it's expected. So I just wanted to know more on yours.
So it's not that I didn't expect the conflict to happen. I didn't expect in the moment of violence that this was the war that we were all dreading happening. Do you know what I mean? So I think you can intellectually say, we're in a really bad place, war could break out at any moment, and you can be aware of that. But it's another thing to actually feel and see your country being destroyed by war. I think that's the kind of thing where you can never really be prepared for that. I mean, I certainly couldn't, and I think a lot of people couldn't be prepared for that. So you just don't think it's going to happen to you. You really, I have met so many people who have experienced war, and they're like, can you believe that this happened to us, and from different parts of the world. And when I did do that War at Home documentary, I think a big part of sharing that and personalizing it was to say, you never think it will happen to you until it does. And that actually every war is in someone's home. And it's not something, the storm of war is not something that anyone can really prepare for in any way. Not on your doorstep,
Question here.
Hi, my name is Yousra. I'm a fourth-year student of political science, and I share your frustration with the compassion fatigue that we're seeing all over. And I was wondering, based on your experience, meeting with politicians, meeting with leaders all over, meeting with military men, would you say that you still have some optimism with regards to what we can do in our circles here in the West? And if so, do you have any experiences that highlight that?
Thank you. That's
The
a
hope
good
question.
The hope question.
Yeah.
I always say I have hope in us getting through. You know,
Who is us?
just the people. I don't have that, I would say, optimism that there's going to be intervention that will help. And if there is intervention, will it be help in a sustainable way? Because we had this 20 years ago. We saw the conflict in Darfur, the genocide in Darfur, and there were peacekeeping mechanisms, and there were interventions, and there were peace agreements. And we are now 20 years on in a much, far worse situation. So I don't have necessarily faith in interventionism, and I think that a lot of outrage, if not wielded correctly and for the right reasons, can end up being quite harmful, because there was a moment with the revolution where it captured the world's imagination and everyone was into it, and then suddenly it was like as if it never happened. So also the attention span of world attention for me is obviously getting shorter. But I have faith that the people in Sudan will continue to prevail, and through the loss and the dispossession, that the thing that makes Sudan a special place, the warmth, the generosity, the care, these things will remain. And I have faith that people around the world who believe in those qualities and believe in humanity, enduring really, really tough and difficult periods, will also get to know Sudan, through this war, and then be able to see the country in a better time. So I have faith in the fact that we can be connected through really difficult periods, as well as like beautiful moments. I mean, the revolution was a very difficult time. I don't want to romanticize it. People were killed. Another thing is I've noticed this even in terms of my own response, is that in those emergency periods where a very critical city or a symbolic place collapses, or there's a takeover, or there's massacres, there's like a group of people that I lean on for expertise, and I call, that's like really growing in a really lovely way, where there's like a community of us that we call each other, we share sources, we talk over things, we analyze, we're almost rallying.
All journalists?
Journalists, analysts, human rights defenders, and not all Sudanese, like people who have expertise in Sudan. And in the war, we all have lost loved ones, we've lost people, but we've also like some really amazing bonds have developed, and friendships that will be lifelong.
So we've got 4 more?
We have 4 questions left, so we're going to have to cut it off there.
Okay.
And if I can just ask the questioners to try to keep them really brief.
How is it that we can not let ourselves be desensitized from what it is that's coming out of Sudan or even Gaza, but at the same time stay informed about what's happening, because we can't run the risk of history being rewritten in a false way or in a biased way?
I mean, the desensitization question I think is important, because I think that actually feeling moved and emotional about something is a normal response. Like, you should feel upset by the things that you're seeing, because they are upsetting. And it's when we kind of push these feelings down and act like they don't exist, or trying to control them, that actually we end up hardening, I think. And I mean, in terms of Gaza, the horror that we saw live streamed, I think the response to that was absolutely appropriate, of like, how dare this be done to the people of Gaza? And I think it's the same with Sudan, like, how dare these atrocities be committed? And knowing that outrage and that anger is perfectly normal is important, but also, what do you do with that anger? What is the next step? What do you say to your policymakers? How do you engage your government? What are they doing that's enabling this war? I mean, I think we saw those steps be followed through with the war in Gaza, and we saw accountability for Israel that we've never seen before. So how do we then take that model and look at the countries backing the warring parties in Sudan, and particularly the United Arab Emirates, and how do we engage with their actions in a way that's appropriate that why are they supporting such a violent armed group? So I think it's important to feel the feelings, and then what are the actions, It's not enough to do one and not the other, because if you're just, campaigning and mobilizing and not actually feeling how horrifying these things are, that's also not healthy.
I think we have a question here.
Good evening, everybody, and hello, Yousra. Your name means ease, for those that don't know Arabic, so I hope that ease and peace will come to you and everybody in your country. I'm Afghan-Canadian, a journalist and a student, so I feel your pain a lot in this room compared to perhaps some people. Questions are, as someone who has...
Question.
This is tough. It's going to be...
I know her.
As a journalist who has experienced censorship heavily so in this country, to somebody that asked, I wanted to ask you, what level of editorial freedom have you had over at the Sky News while telling the story of your homeland first? And then, how do you think your reporting through Sky News, it being a British outlet, can help bring about or influence better global foreign policies, considering the excessive power that nation has over what is happening in Sudan? We know so far that it's not directly importing, arms, but indirectly there is something. But that aside, the Brits have a ton of power. And
we're short on time, so you may want to choose just one of those.
Okay, and I also need to, with my jet lag, remember exactly.
Yeah.
But I think I got it. So I am very privileged at Sky. I pitch the stories I want to do. I think there hasn't been an incident where the story that we've pitched as a team has been turned down or thing, unless it's like a planning reason and we're like, okay, yeah, maybe we can't do 3 stories in 2 months. But I also tweet whatever I want, and I say what I want and I share what I want. And I also think that fundamentally the fact that I'm Sudanese, the only Sudanese person in the news organization, it doesn't make me an expert necessarily. My experience gives me expertise, but no one would dare to come and tell me what to say about my own country. But my bosses, I have to say, have been extremely supportive. Like, the amount of resources they poured into me covering Sudan is like over, at this point, £300,000 in the last 2.5 years. And I actually have to acknowledge that and be like, thank you to them, because they could have just sent me once or twice and ticked it off the list. But
truly, it's not every newsroom.
It's not at all. In terms of the Brits being held accountable, I absolutely think that covering the war on a UK channel puts pressure on them. And we have seen, questions come up in Parliament around, their lack of action. But I also have very little faith that the Brits are going to do anything about this, just like I have little faith in other Western countries. So I actually don't even focus on them, to be honest. I'm just like, it's coming back to the fact that I'm not really anymore trying to initiate some sort of response from any of these countries. I'm just doing it because the people in Sudan deserve for their experiences to be archived and known.
Okay, second last question, is it? Okay,
I'll keep it brief, but it is double-barreled.
Okay.
You had mentioned something along the lines of one mother's grief is no greater than another, it's equal, it's no lesser. Do you find that there's a certain level of resentment towards conflicts that are maybe better covered, or towards societies that are maybe more privileged? That I'm not sure the level of news access in Sudan right now, but how does that manifest?
That's a really good question. I definitely felt at some point there was just a bit of, I think, just pain. Like, why is there so much attention on Ukraine and then on Gaza? And I think that even the sense of like, it wasn't Oppression Olympics, because I was assessing kind of the discourse online, and I felt like actually it was just a feeling of like, what about us? It's not necessarily taking away from the people of Gaza or taking away from the people of Ukraine. It's just a sense of, why is there selective empathy? Why are you able to empathize with some people over the other? As having myself covered the war in Ukraine, covered the war in Palestine, covered the war in the DRC, I think this is what kind of gives me the sense of we can care about all of them, and we don't have to be pit against each other. And as much as the would I say, benefits the West has given Ukrainian refugees and families. I mean, it is very clear-cut that there is, racism in how they approach refugees from countries in Africa. I also have seen the level of suffering in Ukraine, and I also feel like they deserve those benefits. It's just that those things should be extended to everyone else, right? So I think that there's a lot of pain, and that may come out as resentment, but that's fundamentally just frustration. I don't think it's a real sense of they don't deserve it and we do. It's just like, why can't we all have access to these things,
We have our last question.
And she promised to be so quick.
What time is it?
I don't know.
Hi, good evening. My name is Nyabol. I'm a South Sudanese, so probably closer to you. I do have a question, and my focus is going to be on media since this is the golden age of internet. And so my question is that what critical role do South Sudanese in diaspora, especially here in Ottawa, where we've been trying to gather all the funding that we can get to send back to Sudan. And so what role do, especially for us young people and even young Canadians that are here today, what role do Sudanese or young Canadian in diaspora play in filling in the void that is left by the lack of continuous coverage of stories from Africa, whether from Sudan or Congo or everywhere?
Thank you.
What role?
It's a good last one.
It's a really good last one. And I think, South Sudan has taken in a lot of refugees from Sudan. And given the history, I mean, being in Juba, I was in Juba 2 months ago. And, it was almost like the roles had been reversed, and there was a lot of understanding and empathy, even though things in Juba at the moment are tense as well. I think the standing together and the fact, like, having conversations, and I know that student unions are both Sudanese and South Sudanese, right, in Canada, which is amazing. So I think those kind of events and coming together and talking and sharing the experience and learning, because South Sudan, suffered from the North, and to kind of share those lessons that maybe we missed, and that's why war came to us in such a violent way. And I think just being together is everything. It really is.
Thank you. Can I sneak in, only because I think you chose the picture that's on the screen.
Yeah.
For a reason. Can you tell us about it?
So that picture was taken by my cameraman at the time, Garin McLucky, and he covered the first 2 years of the war with me. And he actually, when he came back when we went to cover my house, he'd stayed in the house in September 2022. We were meant to go on a trip to Al-Fashir with Save the Children. So he came and stayed in the guest room. We didn't end up being allowed to go because of...
So he had a connection to the house.
Yeah. And he had a connection, and he even went in the guest room. He's like, that's my room. And it was just like... And doing it with him was such a big deal, because I could just be open and not like feel, too vulnerable or exposed. And he took this shot, was the closing shot of the first piece we did from Chad, where refugees had come in from Darfur, the first bout of violence in this iteration of war. And we saw her hands on the thorns, and we took the shot. And I think it's this kind of like holding on, and it really just for me represents like the endurance. And I just love this image. I can't even like articulate why I love this image. I think you just look at it and you're just like, okay.
I think we get it, right?
Yeah, hope prevails,
Can I ask one last question? How would you describe the Sudanese spirit?
Incredibly generous, open, and, warm in a way that, people go to Sudan and they're obsessed with Sudan, like people who aren't Sudanese, and I think they call it like the Khartoum bug or something. And then it's like, oh, you drink from the Nile, you're always going back. But I think the Sudanese spirit is so, it engulfs, the oneness that we talk about. We have gatherings, and it's like everyone's in unison. Like there's a way in which we all kind of collapse into each other that I think is a part of the generosity. And I think what's been painful about this war is feeling like, Sudan isn't just generous in its people, it's generous with its land. The land gives, whether it's in like food or resources, and feeling that like the vultures have descended, you know? So everything that makes us so great and wonderful is also, I think, a big part of our curse and why we've been brutalized in this way.
I would say that you've brought a little bit of that spirit, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This brings our event to a close. Before we depart, let me thank all of those who helped to make this happen, our partners at CBC Ideas, the Stursberg family, Nanaba, the folks from Carleton's Media Production Services. Thank you all for making this happen. And thank you to you. This is the most people I have ever seen in this space. And I think that tells us something. And it's a bit counterintuitive. It's like no one cares about Sudan. And you organize an event and 275 people come. Yeah. And so that I see as a positive. But Yousra, most of all, that's because of you. And people wanted to hear you. And again, I thank you for spending 2 days with us, spending so much time with our students. And then it already felt like we'd already done everything that you came here to do, and then we did the lecture tonight. So thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you do and your humanity. Yeah. And that's what this is about. And we do have some presents for you, which we'll give to you later. And so thanks again, everyone. And this brings our event to a close. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. And thank you, Brenda.
Thank you.
I say thank you. Thank you.